spirit of life and love. We are here because we believe what we do matters. We are here because we believe how we live our life matters. That with every act of kindness or meanness, courage or fear, love or hate, we are weaving the fabric of the universe that holds us all. We are here because we need encouragement, because we need strength, because so often we get distracted. We get in a rush and don't think. We choose the easy way when the harder path is what our spirits truly long for. We are here because none of us is perfect, but together we inspire one another to try again, to take another step. We are here because we have felt the stirrings of love and grace in our hearts and hands, and we crave more of that for ourselves, and not only for ourselves, for everyone. We are here because how we live matters. Blessed be. Once upon a time, a queen sat on her balcony eating rice cakes and honey with her chief advisor. As they ate, they gazed down at the busy street below. The queen pointed to something in the distance, and as she did, a drop of honey from her rice cake landed on the balcony railing. "My queen, you have spilled a drop of honey," observed the advisor. "Shall I call a servant to come and clean it up?" But the queen laughed. "A little drop of honey is not my problem." And the next time I say that, feel free to join in. "Someone will clean it later." They went on eating and talking as the drop of honey warmed in the sun and began to slowly drip down the side of the railing until it landed in the street below with a plop. "Your Highness," the advisor said, "that drop of honey has now fallen into the street where it is attracting flies. Shouldn't we call a servant to come and clean it up?" But again the queen yawned lazily and replied, "A little drop of honey and a few flies are not my problem. Someone will deal with it later." Soon a lizard darted out from underneath the palace wall and began to catch the flies on her tongue. Then a cat sprang from the baker's shop and began to bat the lizard back and forth like a toy. Just then, a dog charged out from the butcher's shop and began to bite the cat on the neck. "Your Highness," the advisor implored, "now the flies have attracted a lizard, which attracted a cat, which is now being attacked by a dog. Shouldn't we call someone to stop the fight?" But the queen only stretched and shook her head at her advisor. "Won't you relax? A silly animal fight is not my problem. Someone will surely see to it." In fact, the baker did see to it. She saw the dog attacking her cat and ran out with her rolling pin and began to hit the dog. And then the butcher heard his dog howling and ran out with his broom and began to hit the cat. Soon the butcher and the baker were hitting each other. Then the neighboring shopkeepers began to take sides, joining in the fight. Then some soldiers came along, but some knew the butcher and some knew the baker, so the soldiers too took sides, and the battle grew. It grew and grew until a great battle waged in the streets. People were throwing rocks through windows and tipping over the vendor carts. Someone picked up a torch from the wall and hurled it through a window. Fire raged, and eventually it spread to the palace. The next thing they knew, the queen and her advisor were being escorted down a ladder from the balcony into the street below because the palace itself was in flames. Later that day, when the fire had died out, The queen and her advisor surveyed the ruins of their land. Suddenly the queen stopped in the street underneath where the balcony had been. She reached down and touched something in a small puddle on the ground. "It's honey," she said, remembering. "I guess I should have cleaned up that drop of honey in the first place. Now my whole kingdom has been lost because of it." And that was the very last day that the queen ever said, "It's not my problem." Thank you. At one of the places that I used to work, I would often hear a recurring theme from my colleagues when projects came up that were a little outside the box. Tasks would appear that had never come up before. Needs would arise that no one had thought of in the planning stages, and over I would hear, "That's not in my job description." It frustrated me then, and it makes me laugh out loud now, because I have to say that about 90% of the things that I do in my day as a minister are definitely not in my job description. How could they be? The job of a minister and of us as human beings is to see the situation before us and respond to it. And no 2 days are ever the same. And no one can predict, even with the most careful planning, what needs or problems or blessings are going to arise. That is why the robots have not taken over yet. So much of what we are called to do is to respond in the moment, use our best judgment, steward our resources as best we can, and once in a while, go out on a limb to follow our conscience. It's probably not in a queen's job description to pay attention to all drops of honey. But I bet the queen in that story earlier wishes she had. But it's not easy, is it, to respond to all the drops of honey in the world, all the flies and lizards and cats and angry butchers and bakers, all the soldiers and all the fires. It's quite overwhelming to think about. And these days when we watch the news or talk to our friends in need or even read the order of service here at the meeting house with our various announcements and invitations, we can quickly become overwhelmed by what the world needs and what it seems to be asking of us. And it's tempting to say, you know, it's not my problem. That's not in my job description. Setting limits on where we get involved and what we give our energy to is actually what preserves us for those moments when we do want to say yes. A few years ago, I shared with you my colleague Meg Barnhouse's essay in which she explains that she learned about saying no to people's needs during her years as a waitress. The most helpful thing I grasped while waitressing, she says, was that some tables are my responsibility and some are not. A waitress gets overwhelmed if she has too many tables, and no one gets good service. In my life, she says, I have certain things to take care of. My children, my relationships, my work, myself, and 1 or 2 causes. That's it. Other things are not my table. I would go nuts if I tried to take care of everyone, if I tried to make everybody do the right thing. If I went through my life without ever learning to say, sorry, hon, that's not my table, I would burn out and be no good to anybody. And she's right, of course. We all need to have a surly waitress inside ourselves that we can call on when it seems everyone in the world is waving an empty coffee cup in our direction. But if we hold too fast to what we believe our section of the restaurant to be, to our job description, or our pre-identified causes of interest. We sometimes miss the opportunity to make a difference with what is going on right in front of us, here and now, in this unpredictable, messy, chaotic moment. So perhaps we need to hold both of those truths as truths, that we need to set limits, and that we need to respond in real time to what we see before us. These are the things we balance each day, giving and conserving, looking inward and reaching out, loving ourselves and loving the world. Now, let's go back to this morning's folk tale for a moment. When you first hear the story and you place yourself in it, we don't realize we're doing this, but when we hear stories, we place ourselves in it. We thought of ourselves as the queen, didn't we? And we asked ourselves, would I have done better? And I think most of us believe that yes, as queen, we would do better. But if you think about it, while the queen was the one saying, "It's not my problem," there was someone else who was acting out, "It's not my problem." Do you remember who that was? The advisor. And so I want you to place yourself in that character for a moment. We see that things are going wrong. We have some idea what should be done to avoid major catastrophe. And we keep pointing out what's wrong to the person we think can do something about it. Does this feel at all familiar? The thing is, when we keep feeling like the advisor, stuck in a job description which says that we have eyes to see and brains to think and hearts to feel, but no power to act, we forget that we also can pick up a dish rag and wipe up some honey. We also can donate money to Puerto Rico when we see that they are not getting the aid they need. We also can pick up a hammer to help build a house with Habitat for Humanity when we see that there is not enough affordable housing on the Outer Cape. We also can pick up a protest sign when we see that they are not closing the Pilgrim nuclear power plant quickly enough. We also can go to a racial justice meeting when we feel that there are racial divisions in this country. The problems are big, yes, but we do have dish rags at our disposal. Jesus once told this story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3, Jesus asks, do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the listener replied, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." Now you should know that the Samaritans were despised and hated by the Jews. So that story about the Samaritan being the one who stopped to help would have seemed impossible to his Jewish audience. And the Samaritan could easily have seen the man on the road and said, "Not my problem." That's what the priest did, after all. But the Samaritan saw a beaten man before him, and he was moved by it, and he stopped to help. But maybe this example is too old of a story. We don't understand the old feuds, so it seems so simple. You see a man hurting, and you try to help. But back then it was more complicated. And today, for us, it's more complicated. It's not so clear-cut. You hear people arguing, and you can't tell if you should intervene. You can call the police, but maybe that will escalate the situation instead of contain it. You can go over there, but maybe you'd end up getting hurt. Or maybe you'd save a life. You don't know. And then the moment passes, and the fighting stops, and probably you'll never learn if you should have done something or not. We respond in the moment as best we are able. It's not in our job description, so we have no roadmap of what the right thing is to do. That's where those non-robotic hearts come into play. You know, every time I turn the news on lately or check in on Facebook or listen to the radio on my drive to work, I hear something about Colin Kaepernick and his decision to take a knee during the national anthem. Some people see this as a courageous stand against racism and injustice. Some people, including our president, see it as a sign of great disrespect for our country, our flag, and our military families. I see a man hurting. And you know, this story can be a polarizing one. People are coming down hard on one side or another. But when we are faced with situations that seem black and white, it usually helps to look more deeply into the gray areas, the story behind the story. It helps to stop listening to the sound bites and start listening deeply to each other. This is part of the moral discernment that helps us to know better when to get involved and when to stay quiet, when to act and when to witness, when to bide our time, and when to put it all out on the line. So here is a little more to the story that might inform how you feel about taking a knee. You see, it didn't start with taking a knee. On August 14th, 2016, Colin Kaepernick, desperate for some kind of action that he could take to show that things were not okay in this country, sat for the national anthem. And no one noticed. And on August 20th, Kaepernick sat again, and again no one noticed. And on the 26th, he sat again, and this time, he was met with a level of vitriol that could not be measured. People demonized him for disrespecting the military. Kaepernick tried to explain that his protest had nothing to do with the military, but that he felt it hard to stand for a flag that didn't treat people of color fairly. Not everyone agreed. Nate Boyer, a former Army Green Beret turned NFL long snapper, was one of those people. He disagreed with Kaepernick sitting for the national anthem. And rather than saying, well, it's not my problem, he did something about it. He wrote an open letter to Kaepernick in the Army Times. In it, he expressed how Colin's sitting affected him. He wrote, "I'm not judging you for standing up for what you believe in. It's your inalienable right. What you are doing takes a lot of courage, and I'd be lying if I said I know what it's like to walk around in your shoes. I've never had to deal with prejudice because of the color of my skin. And for me to say that I can relate to what you've gone through is as ignorant as someone who's never been in combat telling me they understand what it's like to go to war. Even though my initial reaction to your protest was one of anger, I'm trying to listen to what you're saying and why you're doing it. He said, there are already plenty of people fighting fire with fire, and it's just not helping anyone or anything. So I'm just going to keep listening with an open mind. I look forward to the day you're inspired to once again stand during our national anthem. I'll be standing right there next to you. So even though he disagreed with Kaepernick and felt called to speak out against his actions, he also showed empathy and understanding. And that show of good faith allowed Kaepernick to reach out to him to continue their dialogue. He invited Nate to San Diego, where they talked for over an hour. During their conversation, Boyer proposed that rather than sitting for the national anthem, maybe Kaepernick could kneel instead. In a military funeral, he said, after the flag is taken off the casket of the fallen military member, it is folded 13 times and then presented to the parents, spouse, or child of the fallen soldier by a fellow service member while kneeling. The two decided that kneeling for the flag would symbolize his reverence for those that paid the ultimate sacrifice while still allowing Colin to peacefully protest the injustices he sees. Colin Kaepernick listened to the people who said he was disrespecting the military, and he responded. And now he is waiting for America to listen to him. And now we are faced with a choice. We can demonize him in the name of patriotism. We can quietly hope that all of this will go away and believe that the racism in this country is not my problem. We can spend our time lamenting the state of things or pointing from our seats to what we see is wrong. Or we can dare to deepen the conversation, dive into the gray areas, reach out to someone who thinks differently than us, like Boyer did, listen to the criticism of our tactics, like Kaepernick did, educate ourselves more about the problem we see, speak up when we see injustice, or maybe even take a knee. I had so many stories that I wanted to share with you this morning about people who saw a problem and decided to be part of the solution, and I'm running out of time, so let me give you snippets. There's a woman who can fit all of her trash from 4 years into a mason jar because she is so intentional about the waste that she produces. She reduces, recycles, and reuses. She composts and creates her own products at home. And instead of saying, these politicians need to do something about this, or instead of saying, this problem is too big, she jumps right in. And there's the woman who went into labor during Hurricane Harvey, and her neighbors who formed a human chain to get her to safety so that she could deliver her child. And she didn't even know them all. And risking their lives wading in waist-deep rushing water to link arms with people they might not even like, to provide a human rope for a pregnant woman to hold on to while she made her way to the back of a dump truck for an unforgettable ride to the hospital. Not in their job description. There are our neighbors, Kevin and Herbert at Shore, here at the Meeting House, who have set up a collection site on their front porch this weekend for Puerto Rico. I hope you will stop by. And then finally, I heard this story from a man at a conference for emergency management professionals. Now, these are folks who, when a crisis hits, get to work to protect and care for us, and it actually is in their job description. But sometimes they are called to respond in ways that are not at all what they have been trained to do. At this emergency management conference, Ken Perlman was listening to the other speakers before his own keynote. One of the speakers was Renee Fielding from Boston's Office of Emergency Management. Renee was one of the leaders who responded to the Boston Marathon bombing. In her address, she detailed hour-by-hour events, decisions, concerns, and considerations of the emergency responders. The list was incredible. From coordinating and tracking patients from the finish line to the hospitals, and then to reuniting runners with their bags. But what stayed with Ken was something that happened when it was all over, when talking about preparing the bombing site so that it could reopen to the public, there was a jurisdictional disagreement. Several agencies claimed that the task was not within their scope, that shop owners would need to take care of the cleanup after the opening. And Renee Fielding simply said, "We're doing business differently today." That was it. No debate, no let's talk about this. In today's consensus-driven, cover your tracks, keep your head down, find more data, analysis paralysis world, Ken says, it was great to hear that one sentence. We are doing business differently today. When you start from there, he said, when you start from a strong determination to do what is right, there is no limit to what you can create.
Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead.
The purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
If you cannot feed 100 people, feed one. Mother Teresa.
If you see something, say something. Mass Transit Authority.
This stand wasn't because I feel like I'm being put down in any kind of way. This is because I'm seeing things happen to people that don't have a voice, people that don't have a platform to talk and have their voices heard and affect change. So I'm in the position where I can do that, and I'm going to do that for people that cannot. Colin Kaepernick.
I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something I can do. Edward Everett Hale.
We are doing business differently today. Renee Fielding.
Amen, and blessed be.